Good evening. I'm Bruce Coons, Executive Director of Save Our Heritage Organization. We were founded in 1969. It was our 42nd year. We're local partners with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and we currently run 3 museums in San Diego, and we're opening another 2, the Whaley House, the Marston House, the Adobe Chapel, and we're opening the San Isabel store and Warner's Ranch later this year or early next year. What I wanted to do is talk to you about the project too. And let's go to the next slide. Originally, this was one of the renderings before they built anything when they were trying to sell the project. There was a big controversy then too about where it should be. The city fathers thought it should be in the southwest corner of the park, or to be closer to transportation, steamship, trolleys, trains, and everything. But Goodhue had this vision of this hilltop Spanish city, and he thought only one place would do. Eventually, everybody came around and supported this. Next slide. And we hear a lot about, and though not as much as tonight, but you heard a little allusions to it about what Goodhue wanted. Instead of making up what Goodhue would say, this is exactly what Goodhue said about it. The entrance was approached across a long bridge, across a canyon, up to what appears to be a fortified European town. The Californian Fine Arts Building dominate the view. Notice he didn't say the trees or the arch dominate the view. Next slide. This was his final rendering after going through quite a few different designs. And as you see, the focal point is what the Fine Arts Building he just talked about. It's not the tower, it's not this, it's the idea of this fortified Spanish town. Next slide. This is what was actually built. Very close to the original. This new bypass bridge would come across here and around the side. And now he did talk about trees. And he talked about this left side here where he had planted eucalyptus trees 4 years in advance and transplanted them into this side. He also talked about this side. He didn't talk about trees. He said, I'm planting that and fuchsia and lantana, the large plants that they had then, for a floral entrance. And that is what he did. Next slide. This is the entrance in 1915. This new bypass bridge would come above these windows. That's where the chapel is in the Museum of Man, if you know that chapel, the wedding chapel, and would come around the other side. Next slide. This is in 1916. A little bit more. This is a balcony that goes into the Plaza de California. These are those windows again. Then the bypass bridge will go around the other side. Now you saw a picture with a bunch of trees. You know how tall it is in this area? And you've heard developers saying, we're going to cover this with trees again. Well, this is what it is going to look like. I don't think we've ever seen a project where they said they're going to cover it with trees. They've been able to do that. The current trees in there, which this is going to remove, are over 100 feet tall. And so and they show you a couple of trees that they're leaving here, but those are actually just saplings from trees that are cut down. And we don't believe that they'll be there. So this is what we believe this will look like as you come up to it, coming way up on the building. Next slide. This was a poster in 1916 when they extended the exposition. Next slide. And this, we come to this point. There, in the hierarchy of historic sites in the United States, we have local sites, we have California, we have statewide sites, then we have the National Register that has local, state, and national. And then for the very most important historic sites in the country, like Mount Vernon, the University of Virginia, and those in our highest regards, we have a very important designation that very few given out in the world, in the United States, of course. It's called a National Historic Landmark. And that's what this exposition site is. And it's a National Historic Landmark for one reason. It's the influence that this architecture had on the architecture across the United States, and the influence for years to come, up through the 30s. This exposition influenced what was going on in the entire country. And that's why it's a National Historic Landmark. And National Historic Landmarks deserve the utmost in care, more than any other type of of landmark. And so in 1977, we hear a lot about trees. 1977, there are a lot more trees there. Most of those are gone now. And then when it was nominated as a National Historic Landmark, they said the same thing that Goodhue said. They said, when you do one of these nominations, you have to define what's important about the site, and you have to have this definitive paragraph at the beginning, which everything beyond that has to follow and support. And it said, again, the California building and the Fine Arts building flanking the California quadrangle provide the dramatic view on the approach to the grounds, establish a feeling of ensemble for the layout, and the stylistic character of the architecture. And so everything that is beyond that supports this paragraph. Next slide. And these are the elements of the National Historic Landmark District taken right out of the form in the order that they're in. The Cabrillo Bridge with the approaches and guardhouses. Now there's two guardhouses at the entrance, and there's a guardhouse that's also called the Administration Building that's directly across where this bypass bridge is going to be. Next slide. And this is what David Marshall said before he was part of the team in his book. Next slide. He said, this is the iconic view. I think we can all agree this is the iconic view. Next slide. And we're going to go through some of these pretty quickly because there's quite a few of them, and I want to get to the project itself. But once again, the bypass bridge is going to come through here. Next slide. The back side of the Fine Arts building was designed to look like the San Gabriel Mission, and all of this is still in here. Next slide. Next slide. And you can see it a little better here. And the next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Once again, there's this balcony again. You'll see that a little bit later. Next slide. Next slide. Here's that balcony, and here's where some of the trees are now. This one is the only one in this view that they're not going to hit with the bridge itself. The bridge is going to be at this level, though this tree leans outward and would be over the bypass bridge, so we believe they'll probably remove that one too, since it's the eucalyptus that's leaning pretty heavily. And here's some of their earlier renderings for the bypass bridge itself from the project team. Next slide. Next slide. This is two renderings, the historic photograph, and the next slide is what it looks like today from the same spot. Next slide, and that's once again what. Now here's the project itself, and I wanted to spend a little time on this. This is the Cabrillo Bridge as we're coming across. You heard a little bit about that. Then we have this hard right turn across the pedestrian traffic and the skateboards and the bicycles right here. And this is as wide and a little bit wider than the Cabrillo Bridge itself. And then we come into the Alcazar parking lot, which is one of the most beautiful areas in Balboa Park is the Alcazar parking lot. But now we're going to have these two lanes of traffic here, a freight and passenger drop-off here, ADA parking here, and valet drop-off here. All of this crossing over this roadway to get to the park, and the ADA route across the new bridge here, which blocks the freight for Mingue, which is why it has to be delivered up here. And then this Alcazar lot's expanded more than 40% into the canyons with large retaining walls and huge amounts of landfill on all sides of it, and into Palm Canyon, which they have to remove a whole lot of trees that they say they're going to relocate, but then they fill almost half the hillside here in Palm Canyon, and this becomes a big ditch. It comes through where the Charlie Brown Christmas tree is and where the restrooms used to be, and there used to be restrooms there. Right now, there's the Palm Canyon Bridge that crosses through here. The new Palm Canyon Bridge will come out here, come here, and all the way down here into the International Cottages before you can cross it, because this road is depressed into this road too. And if you've been there during large events, there's a lot of traffic through here, but that won't, foot traffic from the International Cottages here, you won't be able to do that anymore because there's a big ditch. You have to come over here and walk on the tramway or the road of the walkway beside that. And the road comes along here again, and then there's an entrance. There's a newer drawing here that's an entrance here now for the parking garage. But all of this will be backing up traffic. First we have to wait for the stop signs here and the pedestrians, then we have all of this cacophony going on here, then we have the we got triple S curves through this whole thing and into the parking lot. Plus, this side of the parking structure and this part here are open, where you can hear the screeching of tires and the car alarms at the Oregon Pavilion itself. And then this is the tram turnaround, which is in the Palisades, which takes out some of the parking here. But the tram only goes from here to here, and this is the stairway in the parking garage. So if you come out of the parking garage and walk to here, you're almost there already. So I'm not sure exactly, unless you're differently abled, what the tram's going to do. Next, let's stay here for just a second. There's all this to remove 54 spaces, which we're in favor of, 20 of them ADA, and create a new parking garage that yields 260 extra spaces from what it removes, but 100 of those are dedicated to valet. And so we have 160 new spaces for $40 to $60 million, whatever the project's going to end up costing. Next slide. This actually shows the pedestrian drop-offs and loop, the ADA drop-off and the valet drop-offs in that parking lot. And all this is going to be visible to the parking lot. The current roadway is depressed behind retaining walls and the walkway. This one will be all visible from the parking lot, from the garden. Next slide. This shows you a cross-section of the road that's going to cross the Central Mesa and cut it in half. There's a tremendous amount of earth moving, both in Palm Canyon and the Cabrillo Canyon and the Central Mesa, and of course behind the Oregon Pavilion, and they're going to put these spoils over in the Arizona landfill, which will expand that landfill quite a bit. Plus, the maintenance of these areas are going to be really tough between all the retaining walls now. Next slide. And this shows you how deep the roadway gets. This is the Oregon Pavilion itself. It shows you how tall the structure really is. They said there's only 4 steps. Well, there's 4 steps about this far. There's cross sections on this, and then there's 8 as you get further down, and it's almost 1 story exposed as you get down the President's Way. It's not as they showed. At least their cross sections is what's shown. Excuse me. Next slide. And this gives you a little better idea of the parking structure itself. Next slide. Now this is what we're recommending to happen before 2015. You saw a little bit of it before, but you didn't hear the whole story. The Cabrillo Bridge is up here. This makes the right turn, the valet and pedestrian drop-offs here, and you go on through. But we're also suggesting that we have managed traffic like Golden Gate Park has, which means that it can be closed during certain hours of the day, and then it can be completely open in the mornings and evenings for the restaurants in the Old Globe, and we can go up or down and see how this works. It's not set in stone, and so maybe it works from 11 to 3 on Sundays or Saturdays and Sundays, and maybe it's expandable, maybe it's not. But they talk about like there's no way to get to the west here, but 2 of the best pedestrian walkways in the city of San Diego are here. These covered walkways, are, if you've used them, you know are very, very, very nice. And the traffic to this direction isn't that much to begin with. But this would recover more than 3/4 of the Plaza de Panama, allow a real restoration. We didn't talk about, they're even planning on raising the levels of these lawns here with retaining walls on either side. It's really a transformation of the Central Mesa into something that you've never seen before. It's a complete transformation. There's no parts of it that are a restoration of anything except for some light fixtures. They're not planning on restoring the plazas to anything like their original look, like should be done with a National Historic Landmark, at least to start with. And they're creating something new, and they're creating this huge traffic through the park, a 1960s solution to a problem that hopefully we won't have in the future. We shouldn't be funneling more and more cars into the center of the park. We should be moving the traffic to the outside of the park and making the place truly pedestrian friendly. This is, if we build that bypass bridge and road complex, we're going to be stuck with that for probably 100 years. It's not reversible, like the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation recommend, and it's just a really costly solution for, and you'll hear a couple more solutions tonight too. There's probably 20 good other solutions, but this is the one that they're stuck on, and I mean the one I just presented, and they don't seem to want to listen to any other ideas. This solution went through 9.5 years of public vetting, and the full EIR was approved and worked out. They considered the bypass bridges on both sides of the bridge before they were rejected, this was the consensus of what should be done in the meantime until we can figure out a way to not have cars come through the very central core at all. Thank you. Thank you.